When we started farming here 45 years ago, there was over a dozen dairy farms between our farm and the 15 miles south of us to the next little rural community. During this time of year, the warm glow of the lights on in those dairy barns for evening chores were an absolute beacon in the suppertime darkness. And every barn held cattle and community. Those barn lights knitted together school Christmas programs and sports teams. They represented families. They signaled healthy creameries and cheese factories and other local businesses. Those barn lights reflected a bustling Main Street where farm income spent locally was turned over 7 times before it left the community. The glow of those barn lights, though, represented something even more important. They represented mouths full of hay and a winter's worth of fermented forage. That hay and forage represented carbon sequestering acreage and a resiliency to drought and damage. Today, there are no barn lights on at supper time in that stretch of highway. There are no dairy barns in that 15 miles. Today, most of the barns are literally gone, erased from the landscape to make room for one more row of corn or beans. We just discussed how government policy, inadvertently or advertently, conspired to destroy one of the most elegant, environmentally, socially, economically speaking, systems known in America, and that was the family farm.
Welcome to the Real Organic Project's 3rd annual symposium. Today we're raising awareness about the harm to organic family farms from large-scale dairy getting certified as organic in the deserts of the Southwest, a region that only temporarily has grass because they use large amounts of electricity to pump water from rapidly vanishing aquifers. For decades now, milk from just a handful of these industrial operations that house thousands of cows each has caused a downward pressure in pay prices to the family-scale dairies that truly rotate their herds on lush green pastures. This influx of lower quality milk getting certified as organic is causing many of the best generational farms in America to lose their contracts with dairy processors. The last 5 years have seen a steady decline in the number of certified organic small dairies, while the CAFOs have expanded. We're here today because last fall, 89 organic dairies in New England were given notice that they would not have their contracts renewed by the organic brand Horizon. Horizon is owned by the multinational corporation Danone. Around the same time, Maple Hill dropped 46 producers. This rate of contract terminations in organic is unprecedented, and if we don't act, a year from now, 135 organic dairies in New England could be gone. And at the same time, large organic dairies are expanding their operations. Why are we supplying the nation with organic milk from the arid Southwest, from operations so large that it becomes impossible to truly graze and bring the cows back to the barn 2 to 3 times a day for milking? Our organic community has failed dairy farmers on this issue. Our organic certifiers are approving operations they shouldn't, especially QAI, Oregon Tilth, organic certifiers, and the Texas Department of Agriculture, who are certifying the CAFOs in Texas that sell under the names High Meadow Dairy and Kroger's Simple Truth, Costco's Kirkland, Walmart's Great Value. The NOP has been complacent with loopholes, and organic movement leaders have been silent on these issues, afraid to damage the organic brand, all while family dairies close their doors. So we've gathered today to elevate the voices of organic dairy farmers and to become educated as eaters. We want to support the farmer-led efforts calling for greater oversight and transparency in the system.
What's the path for organic dairy farm these days? Are things getting better or worse?
Oh, things are definitely far worse.
Worse than when? When were things better?
Oh, just not that many years ago, 2016 or 17, that my son, Organic Valley, was clamoring for milk. So my sons doubled the herd, built a barn, put in free stalls, went to, bought a self-propelled chopper, and took on a huge amount of debt. Went from 120 to basically 250 cows now we're milking. But the price has dropped considerably. We're down $10 a hundred from what it was 5 years ago, and it's a struggle now to make ends meet. We took on all that. My sons took on all that debt, and it's got to be serviced. And the other issue is we diversified with the farm store, and we diversified with selling organic grain. We bought a grinder mixer and a blower truck. And at one time we had 12 to 15 local organic dairies that we were delivering grain to. And we're down to 2 now, because a combination of 2 things. The illegal grain that has come into the country has lowered the price of it to the point we can't compete with it. And also, of those 15 dairies, 2 went to another supplier, and then the others have all sold out. With the price of milk dropping and getting below the cost of production, they sold their dairy and they're not milking anymore. They had family members that were going to take over, and then decided that we're headed the same place that conventional milk is, with a flood of the market, and it's just not working for a lot of dairies.
In that period since last 6 years,
Yeah.
The price of milk has dropped from being a price that you can make a living at.
Yes, yes. The price that we could make a good living at. We were around $40 a hundred.
Yeah.
And now it'd have to be more today, because the price of everything has gone up so dramatically in the last few years. But now we're down around $30 a hundred, I think, and it's just not enough.
Those organic dairy farms no longer exist. Yeah.
No, they don't.
What are we at risk of losing as these dairies close their doors?
Gosh, it's a devastating answer to give. But when you lose a family on the land, you've lost it forever. I can just say there are very few bright sides of how to pick up the pieces once land is lost.
So what happens when those small farms go out of business? There was a story in USA Today about the 6 mega dairies in Texas, certified organic, produce 1.3 times the milk of 450 organic family farms in Wisconsin. So what happens to the 450 farms, and what's happening in Vermont, is that those big farms can produce milk cheaper because they're not paying the costs, they're not paying for the pollution, they're not paying for the health care, they're not paying for the climate change. They're just paying as little as they can for their workers, which isn't much, and they're producing milk very cheaply, putting it in the market. And what happens is the price of milk goes down. And that becomes not an alternative in the marketplace. That becomes a mandate. If you can't produce milk that cheaply, the people you sell to are going to buy from them. I mean the processors, the handlers are going to buy from somebody who can produce it that cheaply. They don't want to leave you. They'll say, God, please, we want you to succeed, but we can only pay this. This is what the market price is. And what happens next is that the farms, the small farms, the farms who are doing it right, we've lost some really good dairy farms in Vermont. Really good. People who are doing a spectacular job of being stewards to the land and of being good neighbors and of being good employers. We're losing them. So they're going out of business. Pretty soon Vermont isn't really going to have much dairy the way things are going.
But the public still doesn't know that in the last few years, most cows, organic and conventional, have moved indoors. They still have images of cows out on grass. That's really like deep in our DNA. And
What's on every milk cart?
yeah, we're reminded every morning.
Nice picture of the cow out in the green field.
Yeah, and the fact that it's not happening anymore is a radical change.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the nutritional value of the milk is not what it was either. And but it's organic.
Yeah.
So So I don't know. I don't know what happens. I mean, you know, moving dairy to the desert was insane, but grain allowed you to do it, and indoor, you know, milking, and you know, I mean, the mechanized milking. But when California became the #1 dairy state, beating out Wisconsin, I knew we were in big trouble, because California's not where you want to be growing. You know, you can't grow enough grass for cattle, and in fact, it's whatever efficiency it makes economically to have cattle in the desert. You know, we are using our precious water to grow alfalfa for feedlots in California. I mean, we're running out of water, and that's where a lot of it's going. It's almonds and it's alfalfa. And some of that alfalfa is being exported to Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. So anyway, I don't know what happens to California dairy when the water runs out. But it should be in Wisconsin. It should be in New England. It should be in states that grow grass.
Yeah. And the thing that strikes me so much is that the farms that we're losing are producing the milk that is exactly the milk that people want to buy. It's not like they're making something that people don't value. They're just making something that the brands don't value.
Right. It's better milk than they need.
It's better milk, and better milk than they seem to be willing to pay for, but not better milk than the eaters are willing to pay for.
This is a byproduct of what I call regulatory capture. It's where the lobbyists at the Organic Trade Association really control the process at the USDA. And so the story is even worse than you're painting. In the Midwest, where Horizon was buying milk from farmers that were 100% grass-based, feeding no grain, they've announced a pretty dramatic price cut. And if you don't like it, take a hike. And a few years ago, I helped lawyers in Nebraska lawyer up when Horizon fired them all in the middle of a contract. Well, they couldn't do that. But out of all the farmers in Nebraska, I think maybe except one, none of them are in the dairy business because there were no other organic or conventional buyers, which is the same as these Northeast farmers that are now getting the axe. You might say it's 20% of the milk in some state. It's 100% of the livelihood for that family that have, as you paint the picture, has been there for generations. This isn't just a business like you've got like a convenience store on the corner and it goes out of business and somebody gets a job somewhere else or starts a different business. This is their lives. This is everything. This is multiple generations of heritage. And many of these farmers are incredibly diverse in their talents, but their resumes don't really relate to the jobs available in the marketplace. And so they lose their homes, their lands, their businesses, their pride. The suicide rate is embarrassingly high among farmers in this country and other countries. So the one thing we should qualify is there's no such company called Horizon. Horizon's a brand. It's owned by Groupe Danone out of France. It's the largest dairy conglomerate in the world. These farmers are just pawns now. And so this regulatory capture I talk about, the goal pretty much is to increase sales of organics. And whatever we need to do as a corporation to qualify for that label, that's what we want to do because it's a marketing label. We want it. But we don't want to do any more than that. We want to meet the minimum standards, regardless of what our corporate branding rhetoric is. And that's what this example is. You've nailed it, Dave, when you talk about these are the farmers that really represent what true organics is all about. And both from an emotional standpoint and if we do a chemical analysis of the milk. And they're the ones suffering at the expense of the success the industry's having.
The options for these farmers are really limited. You know, the only real solution for them to get contracts is either Organic Valley, Stonyfield, or somebody else launching their own products. But the problem is actually worse than I've described it, because in addition to dropping the farms, Horizon, as I mentioned already, is replacing that milk with milk from other farms. So it's not like there's suddenly a market gap, right? 89 farm market gap. There's no gap at all. They're just bringing other milk into the market.
Oh, wait. So they're shipping milk from Texas to be processed in Wisconsin?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. They have been for quite a few years.
Will that be pasteurized already?
It won't be pasteurized, but it will go ultra pasteurization.
Once it gets there?
Once it gets there. So then that...
So a farm, a huge farm in Texas The truck's coming and picking up and driving it to Wisconsin to be processed?
Yes.
And from there, does it come to New England?
It doesn't come to New England as raw milk. It will come as packaged product, but
like yogurt?
No,
cheese,
fluid milk in half-gallon packets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but again, their milk from Wisconsin comes up to New England. So the milk coming into the Midwest from these large CAFOs, then that displaces milk in that region that's local to that region, which gets sold at a lower cost up into New York. New York mainly because that's where the large processors are. And you know, I went, much as I hate going to supermarkets, and I went to a local one in down the road and looked at the different codes on the top of the milk cartons, and you can tell by those codes which state the milk was processed in and which plant in that state. And you know, it was amazing. You had milk in packages in western Massachusetts that had come from Colorado.
Is that organic milk?
Organic milk. Organically certified milk.
Organic, thank you.
And you know, here we're saying, well, we're losing our dairy farmers in New England and New York. So why the hell are we trucking milk in packages all the way from Colorado? Because it's cheaper.
They made a decision that, as they claim, for transportation cost reasons, it was no longer affordable to bring milk from eastern New York, let alone Maine, across the region to Buffalo, where they produce most of their products. And so they say that reduction of transportation costs has led them to let these farmers go. Initially with 1 year's notice, and now more recently they've given an extension to the end of February 2023. They claim that it wasn't a move, as many have claimed, to to go from smaller farms to bigger farms. I mentioned our herd average, which is around 66 cows per farm. That's generally Organic Valley's average in the region. My guess is Horizon must have been close to that, but they're certainly under 100 cows. Inevitably, when you go west, which is what they're doing, to Ohio, Western New York, you get to these larger farms. So the average herd size is going to grow. So while they may say that the reasoning wasn't to go with bigger farms, the inevitable truth is that they are going with bigger farms. That's just the physics. Northeast farms, New England farms tend to be smaller. I mean, I have farmers, Stonyfield has farmers who make money with 21 cows. When I say our 66 cow average, you know there's a lot under, there's a lot above. But certainly these are not 200, 300, 400 cow farms like conventional.
Gary, I noticed that 6 of the farms that Horizon is dropping are actually pretty close to their processing plant.
4 of them.
4 of them.
4 of them, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, when we mapped for the first time this out, I found the same thing. So it does call into question the transportation claim.
When we see organic growing, part of the reason it's growing so quickly is because it's getting cheaper and cheaper. And it's getting cheaper and cheaper because the cost of production is going down because it's not really organic. And so I love to see organic grow. I would like to see the whole country be 100% organic. That's our goal. But it's not enough to have it be labeled organic. It needs to actually be organic.
So organic is actually a really beautiful story, and it was what many of the founders of the organic movement were hoping would happen. That organic would be a true alternative for the survival of the small family farm. And it was for dairy for a long time. And so now to see the same thing happen to organic that happened to conventional, which is consolidation and monopolization of the processing and canceling of contracts with the smaller dairies because it's a little bit further to drive to pick up their milk. You know, organic is no longer the savior of the small family farm, and it was for about a decade. And, you know, it's just, are we going to just sit here and let the same thing happen in organic that happened in conventional? I hope not. But we have been.
I remember when Danone bought Horizon, everyone said, well, wait and see what happens. You know, and the end result is not going to be good for family farms. And they're right. That's why why I wasn't surprised. I think unfortunately, I think there's more to come because the competition. You know, if Danone, if they do this and then they lower their product price, what's Stonyfield going to do? They're going to take some of these farms, but how are they going to compete? You know, how are all the other yogurt makers going to compete?
By the 1980s, people became very sensitized to how their food might be grown, and the organic industry kind of took off. And at the beginning, it was guided by the founders of the organic movement, so farmers. And Organic Valley started with as a vegetable co-op. They still sell some vegetables, but they made a strategic mistake. They sold milk to a couple investors that launched a business called Horizon Organic. And the very first thing they did, Dave, was they converted, one of the owners is a gentleman by the name of Mark Pepperzak, who at the time was the largest conventional dairy producer in the country. He had CAFOs from Idaho to Florida. And they converted one in Idaho to certified organic.
When Organic Valley came in, which happened that same summer that we started processing milk, there was competition for farms. So Organic Valley came in and said, well, you know, you'd have to buy in your equity, buy shares in their co-op, but they paid more money. So then a lot of farms went that direction. So Horizon then was like, oh, well, we'll pay more money. So there was an escalation there because there was the competitors. So they were like, oh, well, you know, it kept creeping up. You got to $24 or $25 a hundredweight, $27, $28 a hundredweight, because they were trying to build market share. They're trying to, you know, build a milk supply. And that continued for a while, for like 7 or 8 years. They just the price kept going up. It got up into the upper 30s dollars per hundredweight for high quality milk. And then just in the last, I don't know, 5 to 8 years, it's crashed.
Yeah, we've estimated a number of years ago that they passed the 50% mark from CAFO produced milk for their products. So, you know, they need the milk from these smaller farms, but in essence, they're for show to a certain extent. And these are the farmers, the family farmers that ship to Horizon are just as ethical as the ones that ship to Organic Valley or anyone else. But when I got involved in monitoring organic dairy, again, going on 18 years ago, it was right at the juncture of when the founders of Horizon Organic sold that company to Dean Foods, at the time a $12 billion agribusiness, the largest conventional milk bottler in the United States. Those investors took that money and founded an outfit called Aurora Dairy, and they proclaimed to make organic milk more affordable. Now that's coded language where we're going to undercut everybody in the business and squeeze you out.
People are coming in an industrial mindset to try to take over organic movement. And if we lose the founding principles of what we were trying to escape from in the first place, if we surrender that back to an industrial model, we've lost a good share of what we're trying to do in the first place.
The challenge that we all have is most people don't even know what a CAFO is. They don't know what a confined animal feeding operation is. But if you were ever there and you ever saw it, you would know that it's not natural, it's not organic, it's not the way you do things. You got cows in manure up to their knees, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work, it's not sustainable. And quite frankly, I don't know how organic people can do CAFOs. I don't know how they can do them, because your chance for disease in a CAFO operation is so much greater than if they're out on green grass.
Dave, it's just like the soil. If you have healthy soil, you're going to have healthy plants. If you have healthy animals, you're going to have healthy food. You can't have healthy food from sick animals or animals that are constantly under stress.
Animals that are grown in concentrated feeding operations, they're called CAFOs, C-A-F-O. A CAFO means all the animals are concentrated in an area, and we bring the food that they eat to them. In nature, animals go out and wander around. And so cows evolved to live on pasture, on grass and various legumes and plants. And they go out and they eat it. And they poop in the field, and it's a very good system. A more financially advantageous system is to basically put them in a fenced-in area, a small fenced-in area, and feed them there. And you grow the food wherever. Some of it's being grown down in the, Brazil in the Amazon rainforest, and they bring the soy and the corn in from great distances sometimes it's closer, and then they feed all these animals in large holding operations.
No chance they can ever graze, and yet they have bribed, subverted, whatever nasty word I want to think of, the USDA into not enforcing the laws that say that organic dairy cows have to graze.
A lot of the large dairies out west are cheating the organic standards in a couple ways. One of them is that after the calves are born, they're not raising them organically. They're selling them off, raising them conventionally, and buying them in the last third of gestation. So they're buying them back and then converting them to organic. So it saves them a lot of money. Real organic farmers raise their calves. At about 2 years old, they'll impregnate the cow, and then it takes 10 months before you actually get milk. And so in that last third of gestation, that is when they'll be able to buy the cow back, and technically it can be an organic milk. But this is a loophole that we've been trying to close with the National Organic Program for decades now, and they haven't closed it. The other way that they're cheating the standards is that the law says you have to graze for 120 days minimum. But it also says that's the minimum, that if you can graze for longer and your grazing season is longer, you should be grazing them. So what Aurora Dairy does, for example, or a lot of these mega dairies are kind of cheating the rules by just looking at 120 days, the size of my herd, 30% of their diet needs to come from pasture by law. Let's just subtract that amount, then we will buy in grain for the rest of it, cut the grazing season off at 120 days. And organic dairy farmers are grazers. They don't look at the law and say, how can I skirt this? They truly believe that for the health of their land and the health of their cows, that the cows should be on grass. So they are grazing year-round if they can. And so that's how the farms that are truly organic cannot compete with the industrial mindset of what is the minimum I can scrape by with.
Unfortunately, the distinction's been blurred. The distinction's been blurred because of greenwashing. Greenwashing. You go to the website for Aurora, cows on green pastures all over the place. I'm sorry. You go to the Cornucopia website and you look at the drone video and you actually with the story, there is no pasture with the cows. Those are heifers. Those are non-milk cows. They don't have udders on them, okay? And they're doing that because that's the persona, that's the image that they want the people to think they've got, right?
Let me just, for people who don't have a dairy background, Mark, because people, I think, what was it? It was 10% or something of Americans thought that chocolate milk came from brown cows. So
chocolate milk.
Yeah. So people, let's say that, okay, people, just when you say heifers, that you're talking about younger cows who have not yet freshened, who have not yet started to produce a calf and produce milk.
Exactly.
And what age?
Not milk cows.
What age does a cow freshen? How old is she?
Roughly 24 months, which is 2 years.
Okay.
Plus or minus. So they get born, they get pregnant about, just over a year old, they get pregnant, and then they take some 9 months, and then they give birth, and then they become a milk cow. They go from a heifer to a cow.
And so before 2 years old, they could be out in a pasture far, far away, just roaming around. But once that the farm, the producer starts to milk them, they need to go to the milking parlor 2 times, or in Aurora's case, 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Right. So they need to be. So this is where it's an interesting thing, because on vegetables, theoretically, you could have a 5,000 acre vegetable farm that was truly organic. There are questions about scale and impact on community, which could be positive on a large farm if the people were very enlightened. But for a dairy farm, and we've got farms being certified as organic that are 4,000 cows, 10,000 cows. For them, you literally can't do it. You can't get to the pasture and back to the milking parlor with that many concentrated animals feeding in an area.
Correct.
You'd have to have, I don't know how many thousands of acres for 5, 10, 20,000 head of cattle. It's impossible to move them back and forth. They'd be walking all day. And so it becomes fantasy. It becomes fantasy.
For us, it's 60% of their dry matter needs to come from pasture, minimum. We're running 80%, but the minimum is 60%. Yeah. So I don't know if they're getting away with it. I don't think it's right. Yeah. So that goes to show that not all food is equal, and people just need to get educated on where their food is coming from, and like I said, know your farmer.
Any inspector doing a thorough review of paperwork, unless it's simply not being presented by the so-called producer, should be able to tell that the acres are not there for the goods being sold. We have a very small farm. I've had surprise inspections. I often wonder if larger confined operations are getting this same sense of scrutiny. Now, I respect my certifier. It's Organic Crop Improvement Association. I want them to scrutinize our farm. I want them to scrutinize my records. But I want all inspectors to be scrutinizing all operations, all records.
One more step. The environmental footprint becomes pretty negative. It's no longer benefiting the environment with carbon sequestration and pasturing. Now you've got a big freaking lagoon in the ground. You've got a big lagoon in the ground, Dave. You've got manure accumulation like crazy. You've got 10,000 cows eating and pooping right in the same spot. It's no longer an environmentally embraced kind of wonderful solution. You become part of the problem. So that's where that whole thing is just lost. It's just lost. It's just terrible.
Yeah. It's so far from the vision of what organic farming is intended to be.
Exactly. Exactly.
I'm here with Dr. Francis Tickey at Radiance Dairy. Hi, Francis.
Hi, Lindley.
Thanks
Dr.
so much.
Lindley.
Yeah, right. Thanks for having us. It's winter. What are your cows doing out on pasture? You only need to do 120 days, Francis.
This is crazy. We're at 240 days. We doubled it. This is amazing that we still have grass and we have cows out grazing. And we probably got another 10 days or 2 weeks of it yet.
So you don't just get the bare minimum and then say, I've done all the grazing I need, I'm going to put them in the barn for the season?
Actually, I talked to a manager for Horizon when the new rule came out, and he said they measure all their feed, they weigh it before they give it to them, and then they weigh all the residual just to see if they can get exactly 30% for 120 days. And I thought, wow, that's really amazing, because grass is the basis of what we do. Our cows probably get 80% of their dry matter intake from grass.
So I looked at Aurora Dairy's stats, and right now they've got 12,000 cows at one of their complexes and 7,000 acres of pasture.
How did you find that out?
They just have it on their website. I'm just curious, is that, you know...
So they have 12,000 cows in one place?
12,000 cows, and they advertise 7,000 acres of pasture. Do you think they're getting 30% on that?
That's not a lot. I like to have an acre or 2 acres per cow to have enough flexibility. But I question how they can get the cows to walk far enough to get out there. And I also question if they actually are using all that for pasture or if they're making hay on some of that for their winter feed. That's, you know, they can tell us one thing in their website, but if they are actually doing it the way people are led to believe, maybe something else.
What would a surprise inspection be all that it would take to ensure that this is happening? What are some of the changes we need to make sure that they're grazing enough?
First of all, the record keeping needs to be more stringent. And they need to have a record of, like you say, how many acres and how many cows and the production per acre, the expected yield. And then they have to also specify how many of the acres are made for hay at least part of the year. Is that 100% grazed or is it partially grazed? And then the inspections need to be more frequent. You can't have just one inspection. You can't have it planned inspection. We're remembering back to when the Washington Post did their expose on Aurora, and they followed them for days, and they didn't see hardly any cows out there. And so they reported it to USDA, and USDA said, okay, called them up and said, we'll have an inspection. So of course, they knew they were coming for an inspection, and so they had cows out on pasture. When they took animals off the landscape, what we did is we created 2 pollution problems. One with industrial crop production and all the pollution and water quality problems with that. And the other one was with industrial animal production and all the pollution problems we have with that. Because now we have to bring all the feed to the animals and then we have to pick up their manure and haul it all back out into the field. Whereas in a good grazing system, the cows harvest the feed, they spread their manure right where it needs to be, they enjoy their work, and they're healthier because they're in their natural environment.
Do you think it will be possible to persuade people that price shouldn't be the only thing that they care about or the deciding factor?
Well, that's what those of us who tell stories about food, farmers and writers, have been making the case. It's not the same stuff. You can't compare these 2 chickens, you know, this pasture chicken and this, you know, Purdue chicken. They're fundamentally different products, different experiences. Just taste them. And that's, you know, that's the argument that's been made. And for a certain part of the population, that works. But a lot of people don't have enough money to make that choice. Two very big things have to happen. You know, one is serious antitrust, and the other is putting more money in people's pockets. I think when people taste really well-grown food, they appreciate the difference. But they don't get to that point very often. They have to buy based on price.
I say if you put a picture of a cow in a confinement operation and then you put one of a cow in a pasture and said, these are honest pictures, which one do you want? Everyone's going to say, I want the one from the cow on grass. You say, okay, but that one costs more. I don't care. 99% of the people are going to say, I'll pay for that one. That's why people buy organic. They're saying, I'll pay for that one. But they're being defrauded. Not always, not always. Most of the organic farmers in America are really organic. We must say that, right? But not most of the organic milk in America, not even close to most of the organic eggs in America. These are coming from CAFOs. And they're being sold as if people think, as if I'm getting the food that was grown the way that I want it to be grown by the people I want to have growing it, and it's good for me and it's good for the neighbors, and I'm happy. And I'm happy to give a little bit of my hard-earned money to pay a premium to get something that's better. How many farms of organic farms have gone out of business in California in the last 5 years?
Half of them.
Half of them.
Yeah, it went from 130, 140 down to 60 or 70. Rough numbers. I don't know the exact number, but basically half.
Yeah. So this
and the ones that are remaining, they're having a heck of a time because their feed costs are high. Feed quality may not be that great. It's coming from 2 or 3 states away sometimes. It's not local feed. They're having a real challenge. So feed costs, and then the prices are being pushed because you've got Aurora, just a couple bucks above conventional costs, or actually prices for milk. And literally it's a race to the bottom. Because what you've done is you've created an example that, well, if Aurora can do it, I can do it. Or I've got to do it or I'm going to be gone. So what kind of incentive for ethics is there?
Giving the farmers a fair pay price, I think, would be a good way to start being able to see some of these positive changes, because a lot of farmers want to do things the right way, but it's a question of market access and having enough money or getting paid enough money for what you're making to actually do things the right way. And I think if we pay the farmers enough, then they will.
Dairy farmers have been paid what they are given. They are not paid what it costs them to produce the product. And when you eventually run out of equity and you have bills that need to be paid, you're not getting paid enough to stay in business. And so for us, that took us, we probably stayed longer than we should have, but we lost a tremendous amount over the last several years.
Have you got any thoughts about why it is that milk sells at a price that dairy farmers can't afford to make a living? I mean, it seems insane. Why is it that and all these dairy farmers who are going to get put out of business next year, 8 years ago, were making a pretty good living?
So individual farmers, especially dairy farmers, just like, you don't get to set the price. You're just not big enough. And you have to sell milk every other day. It has to be picked up by federal law and by standards of quality. Like, milk produced yesterday needs to leave the farm today, every day, all year round. And so it makes it really hard to negotiate, to be like, you can't have my milk until you pay me more money. You'd have to get all those farmers together and do that all at the same time. Here's what we want. And you have to, when you're negotiating with corporations, you got to do that constantly.
Now, it was suggested to me by a dairy farmer that, in fact, Danone is doing just fine.
Danone has to be doing fine because they're in a whole different economy. If they weren't, they would get bought up by a hedge fund, chopped up into little pieces, and sold off for bits. So what they need to be able to keep going is not on the same scale of profitability as what a farm needs to keep going.
In the last 8 years, the price of organic milk has gone way down. The sales have gone way up. Have the processors, have the brands, has Horizon made less money because the price went way down?
It's difficult to tell because they don't identify it in their accounting, but why would Danone buy White Wave if it wasn't to make money? And so from their point of view, then they have been making money. It may not be published in detail in their reports because they tend not to do that, but it gets hidden behind, oh, sales in organic for this year were good. Now that could mean anything, but so they're able to pay executives a good salary, which is fine. They're able to pay their shareholders a good return. And so, you know, they are making money. And the marketing people in between are making money.
Could you unpack too, and I learned this from you, and it's probably one of the most disturbing things I've ever learned. So I want everybody to know this, but when we seem to have overproduction, or right now we've got a glut of milk, even in the organic industry, we have a glut of organic milk. What happens is the industrial operations tend to expand and produce more during this time. Would you explain why they do that and how they're able to do that?
Yeah. You get an oversupply. What usually happens is you lower the price, wholesale price. The packers would lower the wholesale price because they've got more product to move. They need to move it. They'll lower the wholesale price. Retailers lower the retail price. And so you move that product through the market at a lower price, and eventually the prices come back up. And so you either continue to expand or just stay tight during that period of time until you drive out, you know, another 10 or 15 or 20% of the independent producers, and then you can loosen up the market. And then you go to the independent producers and you say, okay, if you want to survive, sign a contract with us, or you just simply replace the ones that you put out of business with your own operations. And so there's tremendous benefits as far as their shareholders gaining control of the system, even if they lose money. And the other thing is once you begin to narrow down the number of corporations that are left, and we've seen that in dairy now, it becomes a contest between the survivors, and the independent producers are just collateral damage when that starts.
As these corporations get more powerful, their lobbying influence also gets more powerful as well. I mean, you think about, like, we just went from the food pyramid to like a food plate format when you're talking about, you know, what does a healthy diet look like? The older food pyramid that had so much at the bottom with like grains and bread, and milk had a huge portion of that. I mean, that was really influenced by corporations, right? By the lobbyists that produce milk and grains and things. And so, you know, it's easy even for corporations to influence the nutritional guidelines that the U.S. government has. I mean, they only can happen if they have, you know, a huge amount of power. There's also, we, you know, talked a little bit about a lot of other kind of really nefarious things happening on the supermarket shelves. I mean, just where things are placed, you know, has a lot to do with how much money and power different companies have. So there are things that are called slotting fees. So a corporation will pay more money to have their items, you know, in the center of an aisle at eye level, maybe, you know, even additional money for those kind of end of aisle displays that you can see. That's all paid for. And so if you don't have that kind of money, if you can't pay to play, then you end up having your stuff shelved somewhere else. Sometimes supermarkets even charge you to actually like keep their food on the shelves, right? So there's a lot going on here.
I don't know why economists are not leveling with people. Agriculture economists aren't leveling with people. This isn't the working of a free market. This is the working of some sort of a monopoly form or oligopoly, or I'm not even sure that there's any definition for it in economics. I'm not sure. It's basically central planning by corporations. You know, the big corporations claim we're a free market system. We just want to be able to compete and all this kind of stuff. But it's basically the big corporations performing all of the function that used to be performed by a series of open competitive markets, reaching all the way from the retail back to the farm level. And we no longer have that. We have big corporate operations. I think increasingly it's going to be the retailers, the big Walmarts and people like that, Costco's and the various others that are going to control that whole system. Historically, it's been the processors that controlled it. So that's the reason you see things happening that don't seem to make sense, is because they don't make economic sense, but they do make financial sense.
I'm talking today with Guy and Matt Chouanier. Do you say that Chouanier or Chouanier?
Chouanier. Chouanier is French pronunciation, and Chouanier is what it's evolved to on this side of the border.
These guys are really good dairy farmers in Vermont, and I think some of the best farmers in the Northeast.
We are a certified organic farm. We are certified 100% grass-fed, and we are certified ROP, which is Real Organic Project. So there's a lot of information there, but it's to help give you people a label. When you go in the store shelves are full. But if you can at least start recognizing labels and know what they mean, it might help you make certain decisions. I created a pyramid of my priorities, which is everyone's priorities really. and it's about soil health. So knowing the soil program of any producer is really key to make good decisions on what you're buying. There's no better feed than grass. So these animals have never seen corn, never seen grain, they only eat grass. So grass is basically a solar panel that is absorbing energy from the sun and activates the roots to go down and start searching for more minerals because it's respirating and it's doing its cycle. So your priority is your grass as much as your animals.
And I think a new way that we can kind of look at ourselves as farmers is we're really just land farmers, and the cows are a tool for us to manage the land. But the land is the most important thing. The land comes first, and then it's how we can best manage the land with the animals, using the animals.
Hi everyone, my name's Ariel Pressman. I'm the Director of Certification here at Real Organic Project, and I'm just going to briefly show you how you can get into your breakout groups. So you'll see along the left-hand side here, we've got a number of buttons. Just click the one that says Breakout. When you do, you'll see a number of different groups show up, probably about 20. Very quick, you can see how many people are in the rooms by looking at the number. Right next to this eye symbol right here, there are a maximum of 8 people that will be able to speak in any given room. But if you want to go into a room that's already full, just so you can listen to what's happening, you can feel free to do that. But if a room is full, you can just exit out and go into one of the other rooms you have access to. So to access the discussion groups, you'll just simply click the icon for the room you want to go into. At that point, the program will prompt you to share your video and audio. So you just click Share Video and Audio. It's going to pop up with this screen, just asking if it can use your camera. Click Apply, and then just like that, you will be in the room. So if there were other people here, that's where I'd be seeing them right now. It works just like Zoom, and you can see here I am right on the screen. So just so you know, these rooms will be available for 15 minutes. We will send you a prompt when it's time to come back and click on the stage to continue watching the symposium. We will also leave these rooms open after the symposium is over if you want to go meet up with friends, talk to new people, and we'll also have the option of being able to do some networking using this networking tab right here, and also going into the expo area to see some of the folks that are supporting the Real Organic Project. So thank you so much, and I hope you have some great conversations. Bye.
So a lot of people believe basically in the tenet of capitalism and a free market. You let the ones who are most successful at creating a product at an affordable price, they win. And there's something about this that plagues me. I mean, there are plenty of people who don't believe in capitalism, but there's plenty of people who do. And I think even here, we're not seeing a free market. And we're not seeing the survival of the fittest. We're not seeing the person who's making the best product at the best price succeeding. Could you talk a little bit about the ways, the hidden ways in which a large CAFO gets an economic break or support from the government that the small family farm does not?
When the law says that you have to graze, and at that point the law was not as defined in terms of those benchmarks I cited before, but it said your animals had to be out on pasture. It gave some reasons why you could temporarily confine the cattle. And one was stage of life. So the thought was that the framers said, well, you know, when you're about to give birth, you don't have to be on pasture. But the owners of Horizon decided that the stage of life meant lactation, which is 305 days long for a bovine. So they were confining them, and they said, well, all of our cattle get to go outside part of their lives, but during the 305 days, where it actually adds nutrition to the milk, we're going to confine them indoors in buildings or in feedlots, and that was just dead wrong. And the National Organic Standards Board started trying to address that without the support of the USDA. So when I entered the scene as an industry watchdog, going on 18 years now, the National Organic Standards Board, the NOSB, had passed 5 different resolutions saying lactation was not a stage of production, you had to get your cattle out on pasture, and the USDA had completely ignored them. So the USDA was fine with the growth of organic, no matter what constituted what was in the package. As long as the organic had the label and it was growing, they were fine with it. And it took many years to get them to admit there needed to be control. And now we're in an environment where we have better regulatory language, Dave, but they're just not enforcing the law.
So you were one of a group of senators and congresspeople who signed a letter that you sent to Secretary Vilsack about this situation. What was your hope for that letter? What did you hope that Vilsack might be able to do in response?
Well, look, I mean, this is a challenging situation, but I don't think any of us are willing to throw up our hands and walk away yet. So again, I think the USDA has a lot of responsibility in taking care of American farmers and their markets. And this is, for many of us, an example of what can happen if not everyone has to follow the same rules, for instance, when it comes to the organic standards. So, I mean, one of it is to build a fire under them and say, look, there are consequences to your lack of action, to the multiple years people have spent dragging their feet, not getting this done. Yes, it's different ag secretaries and, you know, different circumstances, but I mean, that's number one. Number two is we've just gone through this massive, you know, horrific pandemic. We're not out on the other side yet, but we have, as you know, members of Congress, appropriated a lot of funds to support farmers and to support the supply chains. So this is, you know, part of impacting the supply chain. So will there be money that can be directed towards some of these farmers, and how can we be of best assistance? And are there some big picture things that we should think about? I mean, a lot of the money we're talking about today, you know, in Congress and in agriculture is about the lack of infrastructure. You know, I work all the time on trying to get more slaughterhouse capacity because people want to raise locally grown meat, but there's not a place to take it. And same with dairy processing. You know, there was a wonderful project in Maine, the Moo Milk people, who tried very hard to get another way to produce locally raised milk. But they didn't get across the finish line to really have a successful bottling capacity and distribute their milk. Perhaps if they were there today, this wouldn't even be an issue. I mean, that was the last time Horizon canceled a bunch of contracts, and that was the response. But if we had had the USDA behind us then, would we have had the funding? If we had understood the value of more local infrastructure then, which Secretary Vilsack talks to us about all the time now, and our committee was very specific about saying that has to be some of the funding in this bill, because part of the supply chains falling apart was people turned to local farmers and said, you know, can I buy from you? Can I buy from you? Can I join a CSA? So anyway, that's, you know, that's a lot of different, you know, topics, but we're saying, look, all this stuff is coming to a head. We actually have money there. This is a clear case of taking some action, and what are you going to do, you know, to work with this and support this? So I think that's how The members of Congress who represent northern New England, also there's quite a few of those farmers in upstate New York, are saying, we have to take some action here. And we just can't let this be another, sad story where 79 farmers go out of business.
Are there other things we need to do besides pressure for rule changes with grazing and origin of livestock in terms of protecting family farmers?
I don't know what we can do. Do you have any ideas? Well, the Real Organic Project met with Tom Vilsack on a Zoom call, and we called as many of the former NOSB members as we could find contact information for, and we asked them if they would sign on to a letter. And we listed in that letter some of the main issues that we were concerned about, things like the hydroponics, the CAFO dairies, the origin of livestock rule, the eggs with chickens with no access to the outdoors, and said that we really need to have these problems addressed. Some of these are in the works. The origin of livestock rule could just be real quickly fixed. The animal welfare standards could be easily put into place. And so we addressed all these things, and we had, I believe, 43 former NOSB members that signed on to the letter, which was a lot. And we had a call with Secretary Vilsack, and he was very cordial, and he's very knowledgeable. He knows about all these issues, and he is a very good speaker. But we also have experienced that he understands our issues, understands our problems, but he has so much pressure from the industry that it's easy for him to bend in that direction. And so, although he told us on the call about things he could do and couldn't do, and they're working on some things, I don't think the call really changed his mind in any way. And he could make these changes quickly. I mean, he can say that, yeah, he's going to get all this flack and everything, but he's Secretary of Agriculture. He can stand up to him. He could put in the origin of livestock rule now. He could put into place the animal welfare standards now and not send them back out for comment again so the industry can try to dilute them down to nothing again. He could do these things very quickly. And he has the power. There's no question about it. I mean, he may weasel about it, but he does have the power, and it's not happening.
Okay, so for an eater, they actually have a vested interest in this, that it matters, just the way as it matters whether you drink milk or Coca-Cola. It matters whether you're drinking milk that is well grown on pasture, from a cow that's getting a diverse diet and being outside and has the sun on her back every day. The tragedy is that we have actually a bunch of people who get that, and they want to buy that milk, and they think they are buying it. That they don't quite understand what's happening in the food chain. They don't understand what's happening in the processors, and they go to the store and they pay the money to get organic milk. And they're going, what a great deal. It's cheaper than it used to be. But it's not the same milk, is it?
No, it's not. And I think I've always liked the Real Organic Project in terms of differentiating and distinguishing the practices of the farm. We're going to differentiate and distinguish this milk as coming from a smaller operation, pasture grazing, and the standards that you have, which are entirely different than that CAFO with God knows how many cows. So yes, that's a big thing. It's a big project, by the way. It's not an easy project, because for a brand to be real, you have to have consumers recognize it and choose it. And that's a tall thing. You have to have processors that are willing to put the brand on. They're willing to do the extra work. It may cost a little bit more. It's not going to be the dirt cheap stuff. And you're going to have to point fingers at people saying, we aren't like that. I hate being negative, but that's it becomes a comparison. So that's hard. We always like to be very positive and really support everyone. But at the same time, there's people cheating. There's people cheating straight up. And the bottom line is somebody's got to say that. I prefer a customer says that versus a farmer. But at the same time, somebody's got to say that and describe it.
I mean, I do put the blame on the shoulders of the USDA. I've thought for decades it's a dereliction of duty. When you have this market that is growing for American farmers to produce organically grown food, to not be supportive of that, and they're so late to the table, they've come so late to the table, that we don't meet the market demand. And so then you have, products flooding in from other countries, you have fraudulent products, just as you mentioned, and you have this sort of lobbying going around to loosen up the standards. And, as you mentioned, You spoke to somebody and they said, well, I trust the USDA. And you know what? We damn well ought to be able to trust the USDA. That's why we have government, to make the regulations and make sure they're followed. And we know that doesn't happen. And, that's a real source of frustration. And it goes way beyond frustration for me. I mean, it's just unthinkable that things like the livestock and poultry rules have just never been finished, never been enforced. But that's people's livelihoods. And when you come from northern New England, you really see how farmers are being put out of business, have been put out of business, because if you don't follow the rules and you don't have to put your cows on pasture, which, let's face it, you're not producing as healthy of a product, well, then you can have 1,000 cow dairy. Then you can, do all these things to centralize your product, make it easier for the companies to buy from you or cheaper to produce the product. And, good hardworking family farmers who will follow every rule strictly and, get their organic certification by a certifier who really pays attention and won't let you skirt the rules, you can't afford to produce your product anymore.
I always think of the old, cowboy movie, and the guy rides into town and it's the evil mine owner runs the town and the sheriff works for the mine owner.
Yes.
And the USDA is our sheriff. And they don't seem to be too inspired to enforce the law.
If we don't mind the gate, if we're not really minding the gate and being guardians at the gate of the standards and making sure that we continue that, it'll get watered down over time. We've seen that. It's been a great opportunity for organic because organic means great things. Warm, fuzzy, wonderful. It's good for the planet. I'm helping, I'm nourishing, I'm doing all these great things for the soil, earthworms, cows, kids. It's a beautiful thing. But it's now being kidnapped by the greenwashers. They're saying, we're going to make money on this image that's been created.
And of course, the chicken CAFOs are worse, and a bigger percentage of the organic sales. And Miles McAvoy, the former head of the NOP, told me that if the animal welfare was passed, which he was trying hard to get done, he said that would lead to the decertification of over 70% of the certified organic eggs in America. I was like, oh my God.
You know what? That's not so bad. I mean, it's oh my God, it's terrible. But the truth is, if you're going to have organics, it has to stand for something. You can't stand for conventional. I was affiliated with OCA for a while. I was on their executive board and their board of directors, and I still remember the speech I gave before the election. It was, the standards that we live by are the foundation for what we do. And if you don't have good enforced standards, you're going to lose the organic seal. And if you lose that organic seal and you lose the trust of the public, you're in big trouble. You're in big trouble out there. So I would much rather have folks say, this is the rules, this is what you got to play by. If you're a producer or a processor, this is what you need to do. If you can't do that, don't jump into the organic marketplace. Don't do that. If you've got to put something in your eggs to make them look like your chickens have been on grass, then you're probably not organic.
I've gotten deep into dairy in the last 4 months. And I'll tell you that as I talk to the old men and women who have been around in dairy since the 70s, two things come to mind. They have been absolutely overwhelmed by anti-competitive behavior. And I'm going to tell you, they are afraid of the dairy industry as it is today. And they've warned me not to kick that hornet's nest because it'll come around and bite me. That's how deep, I'm going to use the word corruption. That's how deep the corruption is in the dairy industry in general. And I'm seeing this thread clearly where conventional dairy wants to eliminate organic and grass-fed dairy from stores, or make it so unaffordable that consumers won't buy it, and those operations will dwindle to just small local and regional sellers. Is that alarming enough?
It comes back to these farms that are producing this illegal milk, the certifiers that certify them, and the National Organic Program that allows it to happen. When I was on the National Organic Standard Board, Aurora was investigated thoroughly, and the NOP at that time found 14 willful violations of the national rule. And you only need one to lose your certification. And because it was such a big deal, they were such a powerful entity, everyone in the National Organic Program and actually the USDA had to sign off on this, that they were going to shut them down. It went all the way up to Secretary Johans at that time. But before they could actually take those actions, the politicians in Colorado and Texas and wherever found out about it and prevented the NOP from doing so. They got paid off by Aurora, and how can I make that statement? Well, because when I was on the NOSB, I earned the confidence of probably 3 of the people in the National Organic Program, and they confided in me a lot of information without knowing that the other 2 were doing the same. And they were always completely honest. They verified each other without even realizing it. So I know that and more than one person, more than one NOP person, staff member told me that.
Yeah.
So I know it happened. You know,
Yeah.
I know they were ready to shut down Aurora, but got stopped by the politicians. And then the same thing is going on today. The NOP knows what's happening. They know what's wrong. They know that, you know, when I was on the NOSB in 2008, we were promised the origin of livestock rule before my term was over in January 2011. They actually thought they were going to release it in 2008 or 2009, and we still haven't got it, and we're never going to get it.
On both parties, both political parties, there's a key person that is against the animal welfare standards. On the Republican side is Pat Roberts, and on the Democratic side is Deborah Stabenow. And coincidentally, they have big chicken factories in their backyard. And so, but you know, they fought that battle for a while, and they've lost a lot of ground, these 2 leaders in the Senate. And so I think they lost some credibility in doing that. And I think that it's time for USDA to stand up and do it. I think we could easily get it done.
Do you think, Kevin, if the USDA did its job and enforced the law, do you think that would change the situation dramatically?
Yes, I do. I do. But again, it's not just them. It's the certifiers themselves. You know, they're technically accrediting the certifiers. So that's where we really need to start, is the certifiers. For example, Aurora would never be certified in New York or Vermont or New Hampshire or Pennsylvania. None of those certifiers that work in those areas, whether it's NOFA or PCO or Maine Organic Gardeners, none of them would ever certify that operation. So that's the real place where it has to start. If you're going to have people with no morals that are going to try to break the law, the first line of defense is the certifiers. And then if they don't do their job, then it's up to the National Organic Program. But I'm not sure that's ever going to happen because of the corruption in Washington.
We wouldn't be in the situation we're in today if the USDA through the NOP enforced the grazing rule.
You know, I don't want to diminish this, but it is a teachable moment. You know, it is a chance for people to see the consequences of inaction and the real challenges that the farmers who we appreciate, who are part of our communities, who we all value, who we drive past, you know, or we buy products from, and we want to say, like, hey, we don't want to leave you out there just hanging out to dry.
Unless some of these operations, these hydroponic operations or these CAFOs, all of a sudden have an epiphany or something and realize, wait, there's more to life than money. You know, I'm damaging a lot of people in a lot of different ways, not just family farms or farms that are abiding by the rule, but consumers and children and babies, you know, that aren't getting what they think they are with these products.
And it's a tragedy that someone like Danone cannot see that as a public benefit corporation, that public benefit goes beyond their bottom line and really goes to how they're invested in their whole supply chain. And you know, it's a tragedy because there is no better union, in my opinion, than someone taking care of rolling hills with cows who are grazing them, producing a product that's pure as milk, you know, marketing that regionally and putting that into the supply chain in a really healthy system. Cows were meant to eat grass. That's what their rumens are for. That's how they're built. And cows were meant to walk to that grass and browse. And if you manage that as a farmer, you have this amazing relationship.
You work with people who are being terribly impacted. Many of these people are going to go out of business. Do you have any hope? I mean, I know that we were involved in a first petition from a lot of organizations, and basically, I thought the ask was not very strong. We were asking for an extra 6 months before people got pushed off the ship, and some severance package. Has there been any positive response or negative response from Horizon about that request?
Yeah, and that, you know, we had 16,500 signatures to it within two or 3 weeks. You know, what we have also done is sent in the complaint to the B Corp people, saying, you know, explain the circumstances, and asking what the B Corp can do to verify Danone's membership in that as a B Corp. So, what can be done? Historically, farmers have more or less just said, well, nothing, and thrown up their hands. And that's not because they're any lesser people, but they've experienced the rigors of trying to put pressure on their buyers. And one of the replies from Danone was, well, this is the way the industry does it. And my retort to that, my reply was, well, no, never in the history of organic dairy have 89 farms been given their severance package all together within one community in New England Northeast. Never has that happened.
Was Danone losing money?
No.
Was Horizon losing money?
No.
Horizon, who just dropped those 89 contracts, they're a B corporation, which means they're supposed to be taking into consideration the triple bottom line, not just profits, but also the environment and the social side of their business. Does this seem like it makes sense for a B corporation to have dropped that many farmers all at once?
It's incomprehensible for me to understand why anyone would want to not have a contract directly with the farmer so that they can ensure that the farmer is going to be there for them to produce their products. So think about it. If we don't care about what happens to the family farmer, then it goes to corporate, and so corporate's going to buy from corporate.
Don't read too much into B Corp. People, planet, profit. The requirements to support the planet or people in the B Corp are very incomplete and not what Dave Chapman would think are appropriate.
Okay.
So I think the B Corp reviewed their status and said, well, you're meeting our standard.
Yeah.
But I suggest everyone delve into that planet and people standard and realize that it does not protect the Vermont dairy farmers, Vermont land, and Vermont cows. It just doesn't.
Does a company have any obligation towards its suppliers?
Well, there are a couple things to say about that. The first one is the one that nobody wants to hear, which is, hello, folks. If you look at Organic Valley's business model and you look at Horizon's business model, I don't find it that surprising that Organic Valley is trying to figure out how to structure things so that everybody can remain part of the club, and Horizon is saying, hey, it's business. I don't see a big surprise there. I'm not saying that people should have specifically seen this coming, but it's not like it just fell out of the sky. It's certainly consistent with how Horizon has always been run. We all would like to think that companies should have some element of social responsibility and should take care of their suppliers in that. As long as you said, what's effectively CAFO milk is certifiable as organic, it can be produced less expensively. And so should a processor be buying that and dumping farms who are doing a better job? Well, no. But will they? Well, it depends on who the processor is, right?
I think there were a lot of choices that could have been made. I think if you follow B Corp principles to a T, yes, there should be questions asked. I don't think this can be dismissed as just a supply problem. These are lives. These are people. And when you subscribe to B Corp, and I was a part of Danone when it became a B Corp, then you are saying that you are supporting a notion of all stakeholders deserving to be cared for. And in this case, obviously, 89 farms are not being cared for. Now, Danone is working to try to provide, help, but these farmers don't want business planning, right? They want contracts.
But Danone don't care, right? It's got a new CEO. He's got profit incentives, and the concept of Vermont and community and family dairies and grazing and regeneration and healthy animals and better quality milk and meat. I don't think he'd know what any of those things mean. Sorry, hate to offend him.
It's, what's happened at Danone is so interesting to me because I don't know if you ever heard Emmanuel Faber speak, but he's a pretty inspiring fellow. And of course, he took Danone North America to become a B Corp.
Right.
That's the biggest B Corp in the world. And I thought, well, you know, maybe they mean it. I don't know. Let's see what happens. Let's see whether they invent a different way to do business. And of course, what happened is he got fired, and it appears that the B Corp standards got fired too.
French food giant Danone on track for its best trading day in more than 4 months. That's after activist investors finally got the scalp of Emmanuel Faber.
Confirming it's replacing its chairman, Emmanuel Faber, French food group Danone outlined its priorities, accelerating efforts to create value for stakeholders.
Pressure was high, mainly from activist investor Bluebell Capital and investment fund Artisan Partners, who pushed the company to revise its strategy. Focus more on improving profits, less on Danone's environmental results. Making Danone a leading company on environmental and social standards was Faber's trademark.
And Danone North America just recently became one of the largest B corporation in the world. How hard was that to do? What did you have to change?
Many people are walking away from the mainstream food system today because they don't trust that system to serve their interests. And basically, there's a fear that big business is here to serve the interests of big business and of shareholders. There's absolutely no doubt that shareholder value is part of the equation, but it cannot be the ultimate purpose of a brand that serves the purpose of a food revolution.
Was there any pushback from a business perspective about why would we do this?
We had very interesting conversation with our investors, and actually even more recently we've started to see the direct positive impact of B Corp certification on the financial metrics of Danone.
We have made sure that our business model was as local as possible. Fresh dairy, which we are the largest global player in with the Danone brand and franchise of brands, is a very local business. In the US, everything we produce we sell in the US. Everything we sell in the US we produce in the US. The same in Europe, the same in many countries. So 95% of the sales of Danone are locally produced and sold around the world. But the balance is really local, and I think food is going to be local. When I look at our growing brands in this market, Silk and So Delicious and Horizon, Organic, Happy Family, all of these are local brands.
I'd heard such good things about what Danone was doing as a B Corp. And this seems so completely contradictory to everything that I'd read about and everything I'd heard from him. He's a pretty amazing speaker. And then I discovered that he had been dismissed this spring. So this all is such a microcosm for so many things in your book, but could we talk about that? Like, do you think that it is possible for a multinational like Danone to be a B Corp and mean it and stay with it?
That's a very good question, because it seemed like Danone went from a B Corp to a business corp. In other words, and B was meant to be alternative, like a B Corp is alternate, different, distinguished, and vetted. And what we're seeing with Danone in the absence of Faber is capital taking over. Because really, when you look at the press releases about his dismissal and replacement, it was about growth and money. It was about cost and growth. It wasn't about ethics, integrity, or quality, or anything about customer satisfaction. There was nothing about that. It was exactly about one thing, which is capital formation. And so I don't know. I wonder if the juggernaut of capital. Does it have a life of its own? Is it an entity unto itself in which we are, the slaves to, and, we are basically enablers, of capital to grow? And to me, what we've seen is a tremendous acceleration of that since World War II, then since the 70s, since the 2008 debacle in real estate here in the United States. And then something happened with the pandemic where it accelerated even further. So we're seeing this tremendous pressure on capital. And we have to understand that, you know, the new CEO, Danone, answers to people who actually don't own the capital. They mine the capital, they manage the capital. Their job, whether it's UBS or, you know, Credit Suisse or JP Morgan or, you know, go on, or pension funds or whatever, they're factotums. They actually, it's not their money. They get paid for managing money. They get paid and incentivized for managing it well. But so now you have this strange system where you have the CEO who doesn't really own Danone, he's not the founder, is brought in to create capital, and then you have people who are hired by big pools of capital to increase capital. And so this is a conversation that's going on. And so you have this withdrawal of horizon from 89 Vermont farmers is like, capital doesn't know, doesn't care, doesn't see, doesn't understand, and it's obviously expressed by a human being, you know, by not by the CEO, but by some CFO and somebody under her or him, you know. But the fact is that, you know, capital is a world unto its own, and so it is the veritable bull in the, you know, china shop, you know, which is it moves, it twitches, and then people's lives are badly impacted and they suffer.
The moms and the dads that are shopping and that are turning the bottle because they want to understand what's behind the small print. They want to know who's behind the brand for their family. Me and you, we are all connected by the same food system. We live on the same planet. We are of the same generation. So we can all pretend that we don't know. We can. But the reality is we do know. We are the first generation that knows, really. So the choice is entirely ours.
So eloquent. I mean,
Yeah.
no wonder he got fired.
Yeah, I know. Well, I thought he said that back in, I think, 2019. I thought, I'm amazed it took them 2 years to fire him.
Yeah, well, I mean, because he started telling the truth.
It seems that if all the processors, not the private labels, not the store labels, but the brands, Horizon, Organic Valley, Stonyfield, got together and said, this must stop. The world will change.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, it would change in a hurry. So.
Or if customers knew what was actually happening, like what the image in their mind of organic milk when they go and reach for a container of milk on the shelf in the grocery store, in fact, if they knew that that's not necessarily what they're getting, that they're getting CAFO milk, that they're getting organic milk, whether customers would say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't what I want to buy. Like, this is not the, like, cows grazing in the green pasture milk that I want to buy. I'm not going to buy this. I'm going to buy from somebody who is doing that. And, you know, so obviously labeling systems like Real Organic have a huge part to play in that. The question is, how do we get the education to happen so that people do realize that what they think they're buying is not actually what they're buying?
I think people do want the same things. They you know, they want land that's taken care of.
They want to like look at a picture of a happy cow on a grassy field, and that is actually the case, and it's not like a, you know, CAFO,
right,
you know, that somehow got into the organic system.
Right. The cow's just a model.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
There is another side to it. There is an industrial complex.
Yep.
And they're very good at telling the story, whether or not they're telling a true story.
Yeah.
They're very good at telling a story that people want to hear.
Yeah.
They figure out, what is it people want to hear? Let's tell that story. I mean, I think that's why the Real Organic Project exists.
The challenge, of course, especially the way the world is now, is that like telling the truth is not necessarily regarded as being like, you can just lie about stuff and be like, this is where your milk, they can tell a story like, this is where your milk comes from, and show pictures of a farm that's been out of business for 10 years. You know, a little hill farm in Vermont, and be like, this is where, I mean, to use Horizon again, the example is like, you know, the Chapman family farm, which has been out of business for 3 years, is still really prominent in all their advertising materials. They don't milk cows anymore, like at all. There are no cows being milked on that farm, whether it's the Chapman family or anybody else. It's just empty. But they still use those images because it sells.
But when you look at the beautiful marketing that, say, Chobani does, right? God, everybody loves Chobani. When you look at their practices, side by side with their marketing, the beautiful grasslands with, you know, one cow per acre, this is why consumers like almost don't have a chance unless they do a deep dive and really decide which brands they want to support.
I think it's very important to question who is giving us these messages about our food and farming system. And that falls under the umbrella of media literacy, which is something that I care deeply about. And it's helping people look at the messages that they receive about their food system and question who owns and profits from those messages, how they were crafted, who is delivering those messages, and why. There's nothing that's happenstance in media. So, right down to who is delivering messages in those media campaigns. It's very important to pay attention to that. Of course, we've seen that in the political system, and there's a lot more emphasis on news literacy these days. But those messages, those media messages, they must be analyzed at every step of the way.
So imagine a model where you're producing a product, but you have no say in what you're going to sell that product for. Like imagine telling a carpenter that, oh no, you don't set your billing rates. The customer tells you how much they're going to pay you. They'd say, well, what are you talking about? Like, is this the Soviet Union or something? Like, what? Were we on the moon? Right? But that's the system. And it's been the system for so long that, nobody's alive who ever experienced another system.
Even though there seem to be a lot of labels now, there don't seem to be actually that many different players. Most of those labels are owned by a few companies. So could you describe the landscape of organic milk for us, please?
Sure. The entry is a lot steeper from a capital standpoint, from a knowledge and diversity standpoint for what it would take for a farm to be a direct marketer in dairy. So in most states, you have to come up with a grade A plant. You have to meet certain standards. It's very expensive. Every family doesn't necessarily have the assets in terms of human capital to be, herdsman, crop producer, milk processor, bottler, marketer, delivery truck driver. It's very ambitious, and the families that do it, deserve a lot of credit. And so there are very few strictly organic, certified organic dairy plants in the country. Most brands use a co-packer, a contract producer. They might bring their own milk in. And in fact, a very large percentage of the market today is dominated by what we call private label or store brands. And they are produced by just a handful of companies, almost exclusively on what we would call factory farms. So concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs, we might call them feedlot dairies. They might have 1,000 to, and I wish I was making this up, 20,000 head of animals on a quote farm. I don't call these farms, Dave.
This is on a quote organic farm.
Yes, right.
I know that you work incredibly hard. I think dairy farmers work harder than anybody. I know that. But it's interesting that the farms that are going out of business, they work incredibly hard too. And so it's not that they didn't work hard enough. And I see people sort of like Bambi versus Godzilla. It was a very short movie.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
I see people who feel that, they're kind of in a situation where they can't possibly win. But at the same time, I see millions of eaters who actually would like to buy their milk.
Right. Yeah.
So to me, that's a tragic situation.
It is. And I think that the challenge there is always going to be to convince. Most dairy farmers don't want to process milk, because processing milk is a completely different job. It's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like you're working in a factory. It's like, even on a small scale, it's still, even if you only keep it to pretty limited, spectrum of dairy products, you still there's a lot of stuff you have to do which has nothing to do with milking cows or growing crops or anything else. It's like putting stickers on bottles and filling pints with ice cream, which is a good and rewarding job, but it's not what most dairy farmers signed up to do.
And so it's a whole new game for farmers to get out there and try to do that direct marketing, but it could happen. I think the model that they could use is they could pool together these farmers that have lost their market, and they need to get somebody who could make it happen, but they could put together a processing plant, or they could rent a processing plant that's already in existence, like 1 or 2 days a week. And so, or maybe a couple times a week. So, and then have their own private label and market it in their region. I think there's a lot of potential for that.
The main thrust of our initiatives moving forward will be to have some more local infrastructure to build a local milk processing plant that can process milk from New England and New York in quantities that can best serve the local community. So we have a lot of value-added products in New England, a lot of entrepreneurs that want to include organic dairy within their mixes, within their, do they want an organic ice cream mix? Do they want more organic yogurt or cream or butter or cheese? But they want it in smaller quantities. So this infrastructure we're looking to build, and it only costs 50 million. So I can write a check tomorrow for that. But I joke about that. But if you're $1 billion company, 50 million is not very much. If you're Ed Maltby living in Deerfield, Mass, then well, hey, it's a lot. But by working together, then we can have an infrastructure, improve the infrastructure to have a modern state-of-the-art dairy facility that can not only provide the local community and the businesses within that community, and lots of us have thought about having a regional brand of milk that we can identify the farms it comes from, and people can go and visit those farms, and people can visit the processing factory. But also it can balance the supply within that one processing plant, so we can have something that can make powder and something that can make butter and cheese, so that when we have a surplus, cows go out to grass in the spring, they produce a lot more milk at a time when the demand for that milk may not be so great. So we've got to find some way of doing that, and at a value-added way that can give farmers a good pay price back.
I don't know, one of the reasons I got into organic agriculture back, when I did, was that it was a closer connection to the consumer. It was like, I can sell my milk, and I know the people who are buying it know where it came from. I think from a business perspective, from the perspective of Horizon, it's like it's becoming a mature business. They're just like, oh well, we buy it as cheap as we can, we sell it for as much as we can, and that's just the way it goes. Like if you can't compete, then you go out of business. And that's, to me, that was really, it does not feel like that's what organic agriculture should be. It just feels like that's just, it's industrial agriculture.
If customers knew when they were walking to the, organic dairy shelves that, it hasn't happened yet, but, we get to the other side of this. You see Horizon milk in your cooler, and then you see, something that's locally produced, or you see Organic Valley or someone else, and then you say, wait a minute, they're the people who dump the farmers in my state. If you knew that, you wouldn't get your hands dirty touching the carton. But, by the time that they have gotten, all these farmers off of their pickup trucks, they're no longer taking their milk, and this gets out in sort of consumers' mind, those farmers didn't have any, room or flexibility to wait. So, some kind of consumer campaign against them isn't going to be helpful if it's down the road. And kind of as you mentioned before, I agree. We have a lot of great things that go on in a state like Maine. We're small. We trust the we trust the people who are doing the inspections and a whole variety of other things. But you can't free yourself up from the total market. Danone is going to replace that milk from Maine with some giant farm in Texas or California or I don't know where. But we are going to be impacted. And if those 10 farmers, for instance, lose their market and somehow just decide to try to sell in the conventional market, then you've got that many more farmers selling into a market that doesn't pay enough already, and the investments they've made in being organic are lost to them. Everyone is impacted by it.
Almost any consumer, even a consumer, who's going to get the good deal at Walmart, and the good deal at Walmart makes it look like a store that's charging more, is just ripping you off. It's like, God, it costs half as much here. This other store is ripping me off. I don't think so. I don't think it's the same product a lot of the time. So the question is, how do we change the system so that the 89 farms in New England who are being dropped by Horizon aren't going to get put out of business, but there'll be other labels that will gladly purchase milk from them because they know it is the milk they're looking for. It's actually the cow in the pasture on the carton of milk.
Dave, there's two ways to answer that. Do you want a primer on the deep corruption of conventional dairy, or do you want a inspirational ideal of regional community-supported dairy markets.
I think we need both of those, because I don't think we get the second until people understand the first. If people think they're already getting that, then no, they're not going to go through the work of learning what these labels mean. But they have to understand the ways in which they're being misled.
In order to truly trust what's in that bottle, I believe it has to be farmer-led, because the farmers then know where all the sourcing is, and they can actually agree with the practices of all the farms that they source from. So if all of a sudden Organic Valley decides to start purchasing from Aurora Dairy, they're going to say, we can't compete with that. We don't want that to be in our product. So I think there needs to be that farmer-led oversight. And I don't think the brands can do it. I think the farmers have to do it, because the farmers are ultimately the ones that are going to go out of business because of that choice.
Like with many things, you know, if you're walking down the aisle in your supermarket of choice, there's no reason why you have to think about this. Just like there are people starving to death on this planet right now, and we're not sitting here at this moment thinking about that, right? There are people starving to death. Like, how can we just be sitting here having a nice conversation on a beautiful afternoon? That's not okay. One could very reasonably say that, and yet here we are, right? And so it's perfectly understandable that people walk down the aisle in a supermarket and select this product that is less expensive, because there is an alarm bell going off in their mind saying, well, yeah, it's less expensive, and it's less expensive for a reason. You know, and there's a reason I drive a decent car instead of the cheapest one I could get, and we all know what that is, because it works better. It gets you where you want to go instead of only getting you halfway. And but people don't. I mean, a lot of people are making that connection about their food more and more, but a lot of people still don't.
A gallon of milk at Walmart or Target is so inexpensive as to be inconceivable. You know, and that goes back to the federal price supports. That goes back to externalizing all sorts of costs. And it also goes back to forcing the dairy industry to scale up and externalize their costs to deliver wildly inexpensive milk with wildly inappropriate environmental concerns associated with it.
So one of the things that we hear is from some people is that organic needs to have a bigger tent, and meaning, well, let's welcome in Aurora, because that will offer a low-cost product to people who have less money. And one of the things that I see is that it's not like that's an isolated event. If you allow Aurora in under the organic label, now all organic milk becomes less expensive pay price to the farmer. Is that correct?
It's absolutely correct. And why would you pay $2 more for a half gallon of organic milk when Simple Truth or the great value brand at Walmart or Target, I get them all mixed up, if those are $2 less and they're side by side with you know, Alexander or Organic Valley or a local organic brand, it's really hard for the average shopper with any price sensitivity to say, I'm gonna pay more to support this farm over this less expensive milk. That big tent is a terrible, terrible metaphor and a terrible way to approach expanding the brand. What we have to do instead is marginalize those CAFO organic dairies and really call them out as nothing but conventional dairies with an organic certification. Otherwise, in the long run, we won't have organic dairy available. The price spread is so severe, and the pressure from retailers and the pooling conventional co-ops is so intense that any small dairy will just be selling out the back of their pickup with a herd share. They won't have access to retail.
So Amy, why shouldn't somebody just go to Stop and Shop and buy the house brand? Why should they try and find a different source for the milk? Honestly.
Honestly?
Yeah.
Because I feel like the way that milk is being produced is part of this problem, our larger problem with destruction of the planet that we live on, that it's contributing to climate change, and it's contributing to people's health. And, you know, in our Western culture, people are not that healthy anymore, and that it is closing doors for young farmers who want to produce food, and we have to have young farmers continuing to take over.
Conventional cows basically live a short life in a perpetual state of not very good health.
And stress, really.
And stress. And so the idea then that the milk that that cow produces is, oh, well, basically the same. It's preposterous.
So, if you look at the leader nutrients that you get in dairy, you're looking at, protein, you're looking at calcium, for example, probably the protein and the calcium is going to be pretty similar. But if you look at the finer points of the fatty acids in the milk, then you want the dairy from the pasture-raised cow. So the problem is when you go into the marketplace, how do you know? You've got different organic labels. How is the consumer who wants to do the right thing? They've been convinced that pasture-raised meat and dairy are superior because of the differences in the fatty acid composition. How do I know from the label which organic dairy is delivering the superior nutrition? And that's the problem in the marketplace. That's where the trust issue comes in. I have certainly been to organic valley farms. I have seen the dedication among those farmers in terms of keeping to that pasture rule. But how do I know how the different labels, what do the different labels mean? And if I look at, say, maybe an organic valley dairy product versus, say, if I go into Aldi's or if I buy the store brand somewhere, or the Horizon brand is on the shelf, I don't see those differences teased out. There's no omega-3 requirement on the food on the nutrition facts panel, and that's one of the problems.
Yeah, and it made me wonder too. I remember Fred Provenza said there's at least 400 different fats in milk, and we're supplementing and measuring this one. Right. So what are we forgetting to put in?
Right. How do we know? How do we have a way of knowing? So unless we have that extra research that's funded by USDA, that goes into not only doing good research, but also then having an educational component and subsidizing or supporting the farmers who are producing high quality food. And that's one of my issues, is that farmers who are really taking care of the land and the water and air quality and producing superior quality food, I believe should be subsidized, because they are saving us money in the long term by preventing chronic diseases. So farmers are, I always say, whenever I talk to a group of farmers, especially organic farmers, I always say, you are at the base of healthcare. You are the preventive healthcare practitioners, and I so value what you're doing. And I always say, if I'm healthy, it's because I have the farmers at my farmers market to thank for producing good quality food.
I do think the culture is moving to an understanding of the importance of soil and soil health. Coming out of what we're learning about microbiology, what we're learning about the microbiome, and the importance of carbon sequestration as a tool to fight climate change.
It's so interesting that you can farm for 35, 40 years and be totally unaware of this. And you think you're a really good organic farmer. And then you find out that you can even be a better one. April of 2016. We went 100% grass-fed. We are building soil and putting carbon in the earth. It's a biological approach, but it's a different type of farming than what everybody has been accustomed to for the last 50 or 100 years.
You drive around here and you see lots of cows in fields, but do you ever notice that most of the cows in most of the fields don't really have anything to eat in the field? Like, most people don't really notice that. They don't realize that all this grass that's this high, like, there's nothing to eat in there. Every single time they get milk, they go into a new spot and they're eating the tops off the grass, and we're leaving, residual plant matter, which basically means that most of the pasture doesn't get eaten down very short ever. It comes back a lot faster, and there's that much more root mass, as above, so below. Because this grass here has such a big mass on top, you can imagine it's got at least as big of a root mass below. So that's doing a lot for building that organic matter and increasing the soil carbon.
we're sequestering carbon, and we are being good to the earth and good to our cows. And we hope that you realize that every time you take a bite of Butterworks yogurt, you are supporting something like this, which is, you know, different and wonderful. Thank you very much.
When you farm the way that Butterworks farms, then you're always building up the organic matter, and you're not even tilling at all. So it becomes a very virtuous cycle. It's working, and it's how we got a planet that was livable, is that plants did that for us. They made a world with a CO2 level that was hospitable to humans and a temperature that was hospitable to humans. Without that kind of farming, we're going to lose that, and it's going to be a less and less hospitable planet for mammals and for this mammal. So we want to figure out why that works and how do we encourage it. So now we're talking about not just personal choice, we're talking about systemic changes, political changes, so that this becomes the way everybody farms. Even if you're a vegan and you don't eat yogurt or drink milk, you want the people who do eat yogurt and drink milk or eat eggs, you want that food to be grown in this way so that the planet will be a better place to live.
It's healthier for the soil, healthier for the landscape, healthier for the animals, and healthier for the people that consume the product. And so on all levels, it's a healthier situation.
The natural functions are working on their own. I just need to be a caretaker, make sure the systems have everything they need.
We really believe in organic food and that it is better for people and the land and communities. It's like magic making, you know. If I'm feeling like lofty about it, it's pretty amazing that we are grass farming and these beautiful, lovely cows make milk out of that, and we make this really nourishing food for people out of that milk. It really feels like a privilege to provide people with food, and really nowadays, like when we think of, obviously we are still very small in the scheme of any kind of food processing company, but we reach thousands of people now, and that's, yeah, really satisfying and very moving to think that our grass is feeding that many people.
If I were to go shopping right now, I would choose the product from the farm that was grazing, 80% DMI or above, because then I know that I am getting the 500 plus beneficial fats in the milk that I want to drink for health. And so I'm willing to pay that price. I'm willing to go in and spend twice as much because I know that I won't drink milk unless it has those, health benefits for me and climate benefits for the earth and, healthy soils for my water table, that's not draining my local aquifer. So I want to purchase for all of these things beyond just, what is the cheapest price? I know that that's not going to get me the product that I truly want. And right now, the problem is consumers can't do that. They can't say, these are the practices I want to support. I'm pulling this bottle off of the shelf. They can for a few farms, like Butterworks, like Side Hill, like Radiance Dairy, but I don't have those in my marketplace right now. And a lot of people don't.
The consumers are still the most important power for keeping organic farms and their families in business.
And it's just not for us, it's for our kids and our grandkids. It's for the future.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do. We're not just saying, well, it's not just it's more than philosophy for us.
Yeah.
It's the future. It's just not drawing a line in the sand and say, okay, no chemicals or no what, don't step over this line. It's way more than that. It's a system to try to bring things, peace and harmony back to all aspects of life. And that will help with our health and our vitality and how we can enjoy each other.
You have the next generation running your family farm now. Was this farmed by your parents?
My parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and my great-great-grandparents.
What are your hopes for your sons who are running this?
Well, my one son has a son who's 5, and my youngest son has a boy that's going to be born in December. They would be the 7th generation. And I don't know. I don't know what they're going to be faced with, the way things are going right now. I've told them that I think they need to consider selling off 200, 225, 250 head and using that to buy processing equipment. They don't want to. They want to continue the way they are, but I said, you better keep it in the back of your mind, because it might be the only way the farm is going to be handed down to the next generation unless something changes with the price of milk. Because everything just, it's going up, and the price of milk is steady or down. And so, I mean, we have that where our store is an old Borden's Creamery. It was built in 1890, and someday it may be bottling local milk again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I wish I was more optimistic, but I've learned too much. I've seen too much. I was too naive, and I don't know anymore.
The farmers of the Real Organic Project, thank you for attending today. The second session of the Real Organic Symposium, called Protect Organic, will air next Sunday, 3 to 5 Eastern. But before then, we're releasing a bonus session this Wednesday at 6 Eastern, where we'll discuss solutions put forward by both the Real Organic Project's Executive Board, and then Gary Hirschberg, who's the co-founder of Stonyfield, will present a plan to help find markets for the dairies that received their contract termination letters last fall. While the government stalls on organic enforcement and antitrust, we hope to find alternatives to the supply chain issues that are really plaguing the organic industry, and that have led to the loss in not only real organic farming, but the transparency and real choices for eaters in the marketplace. You'll receive an email with links to both Wednesday and Sunday's events on those days. We now hope you'll take the time to meet other attendees by clicking the network button on the left-hand side of your screen, or going back to the breakout rooms. Remember, the farmers can't change the system alone. Past farmer-led movements have failed without support from the eaters. So we're all here today because we still believe that there is nothing more powerful than an educated community who comes together and makes up their mind to create change.
When we started farming here 45 years ago, there was over a dozen dairy farms between our farm and the 15 miles south of us to the next little rural community. During this time of year, the warm glow of the lights on in those dairy barns for evening chores were an absolute beacon in the supper time darkness. And every barn held cattle and community. Those barn lights knitted together school Christmas programs and sports teams. They represented families that filled pews and bleachers. They signaled healthy creameries and cheese factories and other local businesses. Those barn lights reflected a bustling Main Street where farm income spent locally was turned over 7 times before it left the community. The glow of those barn lights, though, represented something even more important. They represented mouths full of hay and a winter's worth of fermented forage. That hay and forage represented carbon sequestering acreage and a resiliency to drought and damage. Today, there are no barn lights on at supper time in that stretch of highway. There are no dairy barns in that 15 miles. Today, most of the barns are literally gone, erased from the landscape to make room for one more row of corn or beans. We just discussed how government policy, inadvertently or advertently, conspired to destroy one of the most elegant, environmentally, socially, economically speaking, systems known in America, and that was the family farm. As those lights went out in those barns, it darkened the countryside, but it also darkened Main Street. As the cows left, so did the carbon sequestering hayfields. As the pastures left, so did the biodiversity. As the fence rows left, tore out by buyers consolidating bigger and bigger acreages, so did the community of species. More chemicals than insecticides were conveniently and carelessly used to control pests, no longer kept in check by natural predators. As this happened, the groundwater became contaminated. The precious, the sacred, water-holding soil organic matter was destroyed. There are no economic, environmental, or social services provided by concentrated animal feeding operations or monocroppers that are laudable, regenerative, or sustainable. So in the 70s, when we were bleeding farms and there was the farm newspapers were filled with auction bills, pages upon pages, we saw the mass exodus of something that actually glued and knitted the fabric together in rural America. I'll tell you, that band of hippies and rugged, longtime farmers that joined hands, they knew that it was going to take all of them to bring back a system that could knit us back together. But lo, look what's rearing its ugly head. The organic standards have been hijacked. We again have a degenerative system in full organic concentrated animal feeding operations called organic dairies that are most certainly feeding fraudulent organic grain. We have stood with our face to the wind, and this can be won. We can restore our countryside. We can have those microeconomies again. Even if it is a long row to hoe, we will get to the end of it.